7 signs. You're in a cult and don't know it. You probably think this video is not for you. You are educated. You are skeptical. You pride yourself on critical thinking. You would never fall for a cult. That is exactly what every cult member thought before they joined. Sarah Edmondson was a successful actress and entrepreneur when she joined NXIVM. She stayed for 12 years. She recruited over 2,000 people. She did not realize she was in a cult until she was asked to be branded with the founder's initials near her pelvis, and even then, she almost went through with it. India Oxenberg was the daughter of a princess. She had access to wealth, education, and every opportunity. She spent 7 years in the same organization, giving up her autonomy, her money, and nearly her life. These were not weak people. They were not stupid people. They were people who believed, just like you believe right now, that they were immune. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Cult researchers have interviewed over 4,000 former members. There is no personality type that predicts vulnerability. Intelligence does not protect you. Education does not protect you. The only thing that protects you is knowing exactly what to look for. And that is what I'm going to show you today. Welcome to the cult mind, where psychology, power, and persuasion collide, and nobody is as immune as they think. In 1961, psychiatrist Robert Lifton published a book called Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism. He had spent years interviewing American prisoners of war who had been subjected to Chinese communist indoctrination programs. What he discovered was not magic. It was not supernatural. It was a predictable set of psychological techniques that worked on almost everyone. Since then, researchers including Stephen Hassan, John Jalalich, and Margaret Singer have independently studied thousands of cult survivors. They all arrived at the same conclusion. Cults follow patterns. The same patterns, every single time. These patterns do not announce themselves. They do not look like what you expect. They feel like community. They feel like purpose. They feel like finally finding people who understand you. That is why they work. Over the next 14 minutes, I'm going to walk you through 7 signs that indicate you might be in a cult or a cult-like group. These are not opinions. These are documented psychological control mechanisms identified across decades of research and verified through court testimony, survivor accounts, and clinical observation. Some of these signs will feel familiar. That is the point. Sign 1. You are welcomed with overwhelming warmth. There's a technique called love bombing. It is the first stage of cult recruitment. You are showered with attention, affection, and validation. People remember your name. They ask about your life. They tell you how special you are, how different, how they have been waiting for someone like you. It feels incredible. It feels like finally being seen. That feeling is not connection. It is a trap. Research by Dutton and Painter in 1993 found that alternating affection and withdrawal creates attachment that accounts for 55% of variance in continued bonding, even 6 months after separation. Love bombing activates dopamine circuits in your brain. It triggers oxytocin release. It creates a chemical dependency before any ideology is even introduced. The term love bombing originated with the Unification Church, commonly known as the Moonies. Recruits were approached on college campuses and surrounded by friendly, enthusiastic members who praised them constantly. Stephen Hassan, who was recruited in 1974, recalls being impressed by the quality of people around him. Very accomplished, wealthy, highly educated people, someone from Yale, someone from Princeton, doctors. There must be something here, he thought. There was something there. But it was not what he believed. Here is the recognition trigger. Think about when you first joined a group, a company, a movement, an online community. Were you told how special you were? Were you made to feel uniquely understood? Did the warmth feel almost too good to be true? Love bombing is designed to feel wonderful. That is why it works. Sign 2. The world has been divided into us and them. Every cult creates an enemy, outsiders who do not understand, critics who are corrupt, former members who are dangerous. The specifics change, the pattern does not. This exploits something fundamental about human psychology. Social identity theory, developed by Tajfel and Turner in 1979, demonstrated that people derive self-esteem from group membership. Even arbitrary group assignments produce in-group favoritism and out-group discrimination. We are wired to form tribes. Cults weaponize this instinct. In Jonestown, Jim Jones moved over 1,000 followers to a remote jungle compound in Guyana. They were physically isolated from the outside world. Survivor Yolanda Williams described hearing Jones's voice over loudspeakers, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It was a way for him to consistently control our minds, our thoughts, our energy, our being. Research on identity fusion shows what happens when this process reaches its extreme. A meta-analysis of 90 studies found that when people's personal identity fuses with group identity, they become willing to fight and die for the group. Studies of Libyan revolutionaries found that nearly half of frontline fighters felt more connected to their battalion than to their own families. And here is where it gets disturbing. You do not need to be in a jungle compound for this to happen. You just need to be in an environment where questioning the group feels like betraying your identity. Ask yourself, does your group have enemies? Are critics dismissed as evil, stupid, or corrupt? Do you feel defensive when outsiders question your beliefs? Does leaving feel like it would mean losing who you are? If the answer is yes, pay attention. Sign 3. Your access to information has been restricted. Cults do not ban outside information directly. That would be obvious. Instead, they train you to avoid it yourself. Outside sources are biased. Critics have an agenda. The media lies. Only we have the truth. You can look at other perspectives if you want, but why would you expose yourself to that negativity? Leah Remini spent 34 years in Scientology before leaving. She explained how information control worked. You're raised with a cult mentality that whatever is being disseminated in the public are lies, and that the people who are speaking out against Scientology are criminals. You do not really look on the internet. And if you do, you have to go in and deal with why you were looking at those things. Notice the inversion. Seeking outside information becomes evidence of your own spiritual failure. A 2021 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences analyzed over 100 million social media posts. They found that users naturally aggregate into homophilic clusters, meaning groups of people who think alike. But it goes further. Even within these echo chambers, subclusters form around increasingly extreme positions. The information environment becomes recursively sealed. This is the mechanism behind modern radicalization. You do not need a compound. You do not need a charismatic leader physically present. You just need an algorithm that feeds you confirming content and a community that frames outside perspectives as dangerous. Think about your own information diet. Do you avoid certain sources because your group considers them unreliable? Do you feel anxious or guilty when you encounter contradicting perspectives? Have you stopped engaging with people who see things differently? Information control does not feel like censorship. It feels like wisdom. Sign 4. Questioning is punished. In healthy groups, questions are welcomed. In cults, questions are threats. The punishment is rarely explicit. You're not beaten for asking why. Instead, you are made to feel that questioning indicates a personal deficiency. Your doubt is your weakness. Your skepticism is your ego. Your confusion means you have not evolved enough to understand. Stanley Milgram's obedience experiments in the early 1960s demonstrated that 65% of ordinary people would administer what they believed were potentially lethal electric shocks when instructed by an authority figure. The key mechanism is what Milgram called the agentic state. People shift from viewing themselves as autonomous decision makers to instruments for carrying out another person's wishes. In NextVM, questioning Keith Raniere was not just discouraged, it was pathologized. Sarah Edmondson explained the trap. Right from the beginning, they said, if you feel uncomfortable, it means that there is something that we need to work on there. It is pointing to an issue, and I was there to work on issues. Discomfort became evidence that you needed more training. Doubt became proof that you had not grown enough. The system was sealed. Lauren Salzman testified in court that one woman was confined to a room with just a bare mattress for up to 2 years after falling in love with another man. India Oxenberg described having fantasies of members getting arrested, then quickly pushing those thoughts away because she did not want to think like that. Here's the test. What happens when you question your group's leadership or core beliefs? Not publicly, just privately. To yourself. Does the thought feel dangerous? Do you immediately generate justifications? Do you feel guilty for even considering doubt? Healthy commitment can be questioned. Cult commitment cannot. Sign 5. There's a special language that outsiders do not understand. Robert Lifton called them thought-terminating cliches. These are phrases that compress complex problems into definitive-sounding answers. They sound like wisdom. They function as thought stoppers. In Scientology, critics are labeled suppressive persons. In NextIVM, Keith Raniere was called Vanguard. In multi-level marketing companies, skeptics are called dream stealers. In QAnon, followers say, trust the plan and do your own research. Each phrase does the same thing. It ends inquiry instead of opening it. The mechanism exploits cognitive economy. Your brain prefers simple answers to complex analysis, especially under stress. When a thought-terminating cliche is repeated enough times, it becomes automatic. You no longer think through problems. You apply the phrase and move on. This is what Lifton called the language of non-thought. It works because it feels like clarity. When you have a ready answer for every doubt, you feel certain. You feel stable. You feel like you understand what others cannot see. But you are not thinking. You are reciting. Listen to how your group talks. Are there phrases that end conversations instead of starting them? Are there words that only insiders understand? Do complex problems get reduced to simple slogans? Language shapes thought. Controlled language controls thought. Sign 6. You are watched, and you watch others. Philosopher Michel Foucault described something called the panopticon effect. It comes from an 18th century prison design where inmates could be observed at any time but could never know when they were being watched. The result was that prisoners began policing themselves. Physical enforcement became unnecessary. Cults operationalized this principle through confession and mutual surveillance. In NextVM, members were required to provide collateral before advancing to higher levels. This included nude photographs, recorded confessions, and damaging information about family members. India Oxenberg testified that she had to give collateral to her masters before joining a secret sisterhood. She still does not know where those materials are. The collateral was stored in Dropbox and used as blackmail to prevent members from leaving. But the psychological effect went deeper. Knowing that the group held compromising information made members regulate their own behavior constantly. They did not need to be watched every moment. They felt watched every moment. Many cults require regular confession sessions where members disclose doubts, sins, and rule violations. This serves multiple purposes. It provides personal information that can be used for manipulation. It creates public commitment that is difficult to retract, and it establishes dependency on the group that now holds your secrets. Consider your own situation. Does your group encourage reporting on each other? Are there regular confession or accountability sessions? Do you censor your own thoughts because you worry they might get back to leadership? Do you feel like you cannot fully trust anyone, even people you consider friends? Surveillance does not require cameras. It requires the belief that someone might be watching. Sign 7. Leaving feels impossible. This is the trap that seals all the others. Cult involvement typically requires progressive investment. You give time, then money, then relationships, then identity. Each step feels like a reasonable extension of the previous commitment. Looking back, the total sacrifice seems enormous. Looking forward at the time, each individual step seemed small. Psychologist Barry Staw's research on escalation of commitment found that people commit more resources after receiving negative feedback when they were personally responsible for the initial decision. We do not want to admit we were wrong, so we invest more to justify what we have already lost. Combined with what Daniel Kahneman called loss aversion, the tendency to feel losses twice as strongly as equivalent gains, this creates powerful pressure to continue rather than cut losses. Sarah Edmondson described her 12 years in NextCVM. If someone had said early on, "Can we brand you with our leader's initials next to your crotch?" I would have said that is crazy. But the escalation was incremental. Attend a free seminar, pay for courses, become a coach, open your own center, provide embarrassing collateral, join a secret sisterhood, be branded. Each step seemed like a natural extension of what came before. Then there is the social cost. Stephen Hassan explains that when your identity is fused with the group, leaving feels like psychological death. Leah Remini described leaving Scientology as giving up everything you have ever known and everything you have worked for your whole life. Research by Kipling Williams found that social exclusion activates the same brain regions as physical pain. Cults weaponize this by making the group your sole source of belonging, purpose, and meaning. Leaving does not just mean losing friends. It means losing yourself. Ask the hardest question. What would it cost you to leave your group? Not just financially, socially, emotionally, psychologically. If the cost feels catastrophic, if you cannot even imagine who you would be outside the group, that is information worth examining. Now look at your own life. I have walked you through 7 signs. Love bombing that creates artificial attachment. Us versus them thinking that exploits your need to belong. Information control that seals you inside an echo chamber. Punishment for questioning that teaches you to doubt yourself instead of leadership. Loaded language that replaces thought with slogans. Surveillance that makes you your own prison guard. Exit costs that make leaving feel worse than staying. These patterns appear in obvious places: Jonestown, NXIVM, Scientology, Heaven's Gate. They also appear in places that do not call themselves cults. Multi-level marketing companies that require you to alienate friends who do not support your business. FTC data shows most participants make less than $1,000 per year, yet they keep recruiting because admitting failure feels impossible. Online communities where disagreement gets you banned and where your entire social life exists within the group. Political movements where questioning the leader makes you a traitor and where the other side is not just wrong but evil. Workplaces where the mission is so important that boundaries are weakness and where your entire identity becomes your job title. Relationships where your partner controls your information, isolates you from friends, and makes leaving feel like death. The techniques are the same. The packaging changes. Margaret Singer interviewed more than 4,000 former cult members over her career. She reached one conclusion. Under the right circumstances, we all can be manipulated. There is no one type of person who is vulnerable. The protection is not believing you are immune. The protection is knowing what to look for. Most people think they are not susceptible, Sarah Edmondson observed, which makes them more susceptible. It is better to understand where your levels of susceptibility are so that you can spot the red flags. Here's what I want you to take from this. The question is not, am I in a cult? That framing lets you off the hook too easily. The question is, which of these control mechanisms exist in my life? Not all of them need to be present. Not all of them need to be extreme. But if several are operating, even subtly, you deserve to examine that. The techniques are invisible until they are not. And once you see them, you can never unsee them. That is not a threat. It is a vaccination. If this opened your eyes to something you had not considered, subscribe. The patterns are everywhere. I will show you where to look.